you there. And I'm going to hide the view of myself because I really don't like that, but you can see me, right? I'm assuming.
Sorry, I had to
Okay.
unmute myself. Yes, we can see.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So I'm talking about content operations, and I think that content operations has finally come of age, which is, hence the title of this presentation. Because I think that businesses are finally starting to twig that you need some efficiency in your content life cycles. So why is this not advancing? There we go. Just a little bit about me. I've been in content for a long time, and that's like close to 30 years now. That's really scary, actually. I've worked with organizations large and small, and as we said before, I've contributed to numerous industry publications. These are the books I contributed to, and then there are, academic papers and blah, blah, blah. And I also lecture in the content strategy master's program at FISTC in Graz, Austria, along with Paula. Paula does a course there, and I'm teaching 4 courses there. So it's been a long time that Paula and I have intersected in many, many ways. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this in kind of like 4 different sections. So how we got there, short section, what I'm calling the beauty of content operations, because I actually love this area of practice. And then we're going to talk about how we talk about content operations. And then finally, we're going to talk about the book. So how we got here. So what we call content operations now actually started back in the 1940s with this fellow named Vannevar Bush. Now, maybe other people were doing things, but this is the first kind of real recording that we have, the evidence that we have that someone was looking for efficiency, not so much on the authoring side, but more on the delivery end. So he wrote a paper about this, and excuse me. And then, they looked at kind of, code, and this is when computers were starting, and it kind of chugged along without much progress until the 1980s, when we introduced hypertext and modular writing. It still wasn't the web, but this was kind of internally and in help systems and so on in software. Then we saw in the 1990s, software vendors, they started building in the support for authoring. So think of FrameMaker and think of RoboHelp and those kinds of things. And then in the early 2000s, Anne Rockley, who has been my mentor for years, she published a content strategy book with content operations as the goal. So I think it was called Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy. So the strategy is the plan part, and then what's the outcome is content operations as the goal. And that kind of also chugged along for a while. And somewhere in the 2010s, so in 2009, is when Christina Halverson really kind of popularized the term content strategy. And shortly after that, there was a webinar where they talked about front end and back end strategists. And I personally really don't like that term. Maybe at the time it made sense, but what does front end mean anymore? What does back end mean? But I would say now, if we were to talk about it, we would say they're editorial strategists, right? They figure out the editorial side of content, and then there's the kind of technical side of a strategy, and it's more around the operational efficiencies. So that was the kind of the back end strategist. And now in the 2020s, content operations is actually its own area of practice. And what started me down the path of calling it content operations was a post on LinkedIn by Dean Barker, where he said he's been using this for, at the time, he said over 10 years. And I went back and I looked at my slides, and I started searching through my old slides. And I had been saying the words content operations for 15 years at that point, except it didn't really land anywhere. People heard it in one ear and out the other. So it wasn't until we had things like DevOps and AI ops and fin ops and all those other ops that people started going content ops. Oh, I get it. It's kind of like that over there. So now we have a definition, we have a rationale. So I say that this is the definition that I use. So content operations is a set of principles. So it's a methodology or a framework. It's not a thing that you can buy or follow the steps of. It's a set of principles. And what those principles do is it helps you optimize production. And we want to optimize production because we want to work smarter and not harder. We don't want to do the rote tasks. We want to save time. Companies want to save time and money, but keep the quality standards of the content. And so we optimize production because we want to use content as a business asset. And content is an asset, or at least we recognize it as an asset, and it's not an inexpensive asset to produce. And we pay writers, we have overhead and all that, and we're not minimum wage employees. So content is the asset, and we want to be able to do things like personalize, and we want to be able to scale. Sometimes we want to personalize at scale, or maybe just scale. And we want to have those kind of continuous delivery pipelines that go along with things like, agile methodology. And we can't do that unless we're treating it as an asset that is reusable, it's fit for purpose. So we want to do that. And why do we do that? Because we want to meet intended goals. So we don't produce content just for the sake of producing content. We produce it because there's some purpose to producing our content. So a lot of times it provides some sort of a service to the user. And if it's if you're using content as your primary, like you're a newspaper, a magazine, then the content is the product. Otherwise, it's supporting the product. And for most of us, it plays a supporting role. But those services are, I want to fix something. I want to set something up. I want to know what the warranty is. I want to know how to troubleshoot. All of those, like, I need to figure out how to do something. And it's going to give us that service to be able to accomplish this goal. It's also responding to customer demand. And we know that one of the cornerstones for looking at content is how can we use it to reduce support calls? So if we know that there's a customer demand for certain types of information, we can respond to that, and it's going to have a business impact. And it also helps manage corporate risk. And we know how important it is, especially in regulated industries, that that we stay within compliance. So all of that kind of fits together into content operations. Excuse me. So now that we know a little bit about how we got here and what we're the framework for what we're doing, let's talk about the beauty of content operations. And I'm going to slow myself down a bit because I realize I'm really excited about this material, and so I'm talking really quickly. So we know all these pain points, right? We all know these pain points. The cost of content creation, is not inexpensive, and there's a lot of maintenance waste. And I say there's a staggering amount of waste in production processes because you have this thing of, well, let's just take a look. We've got version 1 of a product, and then we make a copy, and now we have 2 versions, and we have to update 2 versions. Then we have version 3, and now we have to update 3 versions. And then there's, another product, and they have version 1. And you don't always have to update all of them, but sometimes you need to update it. Let's say you've got, this is for a phone, and iPhone, maybe this is for an iPhone. So it's version 1 would be for iPhone 10, and version 2 is for iPhone 11, and version 3 is for iPhone 12. And if they update something, and all 3 are on the market, still on the market, you might have to update all 3 versions. Now you have another product. And so you have version 1, and then version 2, and now you've got version 4 of your first product, and so on and so forth. And so what that means is now you have 20 documents to track. And it's all more or less the same document. There's a lot of overlap. It can be 50%, 80%, 90% sometimes. But you have to go into each document, open it, update it, search, update, close, etc. And it's error prone because it's very manual. So what we want to do is we want to introduce those efficiencies that will get us to the next level. So if you think, oh, excuse me. So we want to have this single source of truth, so modular components. They don't all have to be the same size, but it's kind of, the Lego block method. We all know this, that Lego blocks work because they all fit to a standard. So you can fit them all together, even though they're various shapes, colors, sizes, but they all work together. And then we add semantics. So we tag our target specific content because we know why we're writing something. So if I say, I'm writing this, I don't know, about a product, maybe an electrical product. So I have the US English one, and it might be the same as the Canadian English one. And then we have to have the French version of it. And now we've got the British version, and it has a different plug, and it's 220 instead of 110. And so if I'm writing this and I know why I'm writing it, I can be tagging it as I'm going, right? And then we can reuse it in multiple contexts, multiple digital contexts, analog contexts. It could be as exciting. I don't know. It can be on a website, it could be on a billboard, it could be a label on a box. There are many ways we can reuse that content. So how do we get there? So people talk about the content supply chain, and I really struggle with that concept because supply chain is for things that are have a concrete beginning and a concrete end. So I have this mouse, we manufacture it, we sell it, and we deliver it, and then it gets sold, and we never see the mouse again. Content doesn't work that way, right? It goes around in a cycle, and this is why we call it the content life cycle, because we go around in the circle, and we discuss something, and we update it, and we do research and so on, and then it gets published, and then we say, oh, is that working? So there's analytics, and then we kind of go, oh, all right, it needs to go around again in version 2 and version 3 and version 27 and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we do have a bit of a supply chain, because at some point you spit that content out, it goes into a database. So this would be an orchestration layer here where you are, or an orchestration phase where you are resolving all of your content references, and you are resolving all the data markers that might be in there that, maybe tell you a price or a date or something like that. It could come from reference data sets. And then you deliver it to some sort of a database. And this is all your publication ready content. And it can sit there and it can wait to be called, or it can be pushed out to its endpoint. Now, if you're creating a document, then that's a supply chain. It's done. Once you download that document, that's your document. You'll never be able to dynamically update it because they've downloaded it, and now it's somewhere that's untouchable by you. If they want the update, they have to come back and download a different document. Otherwise, you can update as you go along, but when somebody sees something, if they were to see something on a website and then print it, now that's, that makes the supply chain, because it's done. They have that printed copy, and that printed copy can never get updated. So we have this weird hybrid model that nobody takes into account. They like to think of it either as a supply chain or as a life cycle, but we've got kind of this, it's almost like this merry-go-round where every so often they spit out, some of its contents out, and then it's done. So this is a bit of a conundrum when we're talking to people about content operations, and it makes it harder to understand content operations. And somebody had mentioned that they were talking to a CEO, and they explained this whole thing about life cycles and supply chains. And the guy, and his CEO, and he says, yeah, but like, how often do you publish a blog post anyways? And so we realize that there's such a lack of understanding about what content is and how it gets used and what it takes to produce it, And if you saw my countdown to Lavicon series, I went through just the 41 steps it takes to get to a review through a review process. And that's 41 steps if there's only one review cycle. As soon as you get into those weird branching things and more review cycles, I mean, it could go up to 95 steps. So there's a big lack of knowledge out there, and we are always kind of struggling. It's a little bit like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, and then it tumbles down, and he has to kind of keep continuing. So if I'm listing kind of efficiency improvements, we all know this current state. We can't find where the content is. Where is it stored? How do we update it? We can't tell if we have the right version right away. So, it might be, it used to be where you would put underscore final, and then the next one was underscore final, and then it was underscore final. And then we went to like version 3, version 4, version 5, and you kind of go, okay, I see version 5. Is there a version 6 somewhere? How do I tell? So we have those kinds of challenges that we have to work at. If you're using a word processing tool, you can't tag content for reuse because word processors aren't meant for that. We use spreadsheets, and I thought I had seen it all when there was a guy who had 48 spreadsheets to track all of the topics in these textbooks that they did for blue-collar professions across the United States. So, all these professions and all these states and all these regulations and what went into it. Then, and when I went to the UK, I found an organization with 99 spreadsheets. They're out of business now, but we won't talk about that. So it's also hard to show which content's written for which audience. I've seen people resort to color coding, and then they have this little key, and then they send this off, and someone copies and pastes it into the CMS. You've got a clunky style guide, and management always prioritizes software development over content. So when you say, we really need some investment in our content, they'll say, yeah, but I really need a front-end developer or a back-end developer or a full-stack developer. And we want to move that to a future state where we have content in the central repository. There's a good taxonomy on it. There are good semantics on it. It's got robust version control, so you're always looking at the last version, but there's a history, there's an audit trail of the previous versions there for you to see if you need to, that you can easily reuse the content. You update it here, and it will update in all the endpoints. That we have some sort of an at a glance dashboard, so that you can look at where is the content being reused and what are the metrics on this. And so you want also for tagging to be automated, so that if you have a whole bunch of content that needs to be tagged, some of it gets auto tagged through inheritance or through other means. And now with AI, that's getting a little easier. Everybody's got AI something in their product now, right? We want the style guide to be brought to us and enforced as we're writing. So we shouldn't have to go to a PDF and think, well, since the last time I looked up this word, has it changed again? Do I need to look it up again? And you want support for management so that they allocate budget to include enough content resources for each team. And to some of this, it goes, we can go like, yep, we have that. But to most of us, I suspect it's still like, oh, that's nirvana, and I don't know if we can ever reach that. So the first thing we do, what do we do when we want to prove to management that we need to update our operating model? Well, first thing we do is we conduct a cost benefit analysis. And so what you do is you compare the old process, and you use that as a benchmark to figure out what a new process could look like and how much improvement there would be. So the old process, let's say you've got a certain number of steps that are initiated by your writer or your content producer, if you're bringing in content and they're somehow processing it. And I'm assuming here a single editing cycle, because you want to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And then how many steps are handled by the system? Well, in the old process, maybe you don't have a production system, so it's 0. But it could be that you automated certain pieces And in that case, you're going to look at those steps. And when you think about steps, you're thinking about micro steps. So when I run workshops and I say, okay, tell me how many steps are in your production process, I'll get like 5, 7. It's like, no, because I can think of 12 right now. So you get sent a brief, you open the brief, you download it. So you download it, you rename it, you open it, you read it, then you move it to SharePoint, then you have to find so you have to navigate to SharePoint, upload it to SharePoint, then you have to find the emails of the people that you need to share it with, and some of them you can't find, so you have to go and navigate to that, and next thing you know, 20 minutes have gone by. Nobody counts those 20 minutes. We just assume that that's necessary faffing around. Faffing is a lovely word that they use all the time in the UK, and it's just it's not a swear word, but it's just very descriptive. Faffing is like wasting time. So then you can kind of look at what's the update time. How long does it take to go from A to B? And you can sit with somebody and have them do it, and you sit there, or the business analyst sits there, and you just record with a stopwatch. Okay, it took them a minute to do this, it took them 3 minutes to do that, it took them 1 minute to do that, and so on. And now you have this idea, this accurate idea of how long it takes to update something. And then when you think, okay, what's the minimum production cycle from the time something comes in to the time it hits the CMS? And it could be hours, days, weeks. It's probably weeks because there's a lot of wait time in there. And then you can calculate how much it costs for each update cycle. And that's your benchmark. That's what we're doing today. And somebody said something really astute to me on LinkedIn. They said when we told them that we could get a 90 or 95% reduction in time, they didn't want to show that to management, because management would say, what have you been doing until now? Like, how inefficient have you been? So you can see some of these things have a double-edged sword. So you always have to watch for that. But then you compare that to what would be the process if you had the right tools and the right processes. So you go from old to new. Here's how many steps are initiated by the content producer. There should be less, because if you have a proper system, you log in, or maybe in the email, a link comes and you click the link and you're logged in and you're there. So it's like 1 minute compared to 15 minutes. How many steps are handled by this content ecosystem that you would have set up, that where everything is automated? So I don't have to go through 48 spreadsheets and look at where all the check marks need to be, because the system does that. So, you know, I've just eliminated 12 steps right there, and I've eliminated 20 minutes. So how long does it take now to do an update? What's the minimum cycle? And what's your cost per update cycle? And you should see a significant reduction. And I've done this with one client, as a department of the UK government, and we had 66% improvement right there. So the next thing we look at is time savings and cost savings, reputation and risk management, and opportunity costs. So everyone's interested in saving time, because sometimes it means it's really important to get your content out there with the product in the fastest time possible to maximize profits. Of course, they want to save on costs. The funniest comment that somebody made on one of my posts was, when you say we could do this better, and they say we don't have time to look at that right now. Well, you would have time if you had a proper system and proper processes. So, but they do want to save costs. You know, organizations want to do things, you know, faster and better. So this helps that. But there's also a reputation and risk management. So risk management, we talked about a little bit, because you want to stay on the right side of the regulators and you want to stay within compliance, but also reputation. If you can produce content that's consistently accurate and engaging and so on, and is aimed at the right audience. So you're not being told to to do something that actually applies to a different device or a different country, and you're supposed to extrapolate, you don't feel like a valued customer in that regard. So you want that, that reputation to be intact. And then there's opportunity cost, and it's really hard to measure like reputation. You can calculate risk management, because if the regulators say you have to shut down operations until you fix this, you can say, okay, it'll take us 3 weeks to fix it versus an hour to fix it. And now we can tell how much downtime we will incur. But reputation is kind of a fuzzy measurement. And so is opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is, what could we have done if we were able to manage our content better? And I had some interesting examples given to me about things that people couldn't do before, but once they had that ability to manipulate content in more granular ways, they could do things that gave them, opened up kind of new markets to them. So that kind of thing you might not be able to calculate, but your accounting folks or your product management folks probably have some sort of a metric they use. So it's worth asking them. Okay, now we go into discussing content ops. So when any field matures, you have to find a way to talk about it in kind of a shared vocabulary, particularly when it comes to management. So how we discuss content ops matters. And I say this because I've had lots of conversations over the years with like enterprise architects, and they will talk about these concepts. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what they're talking about, and I better go and learn about it. But when you can talk to them in their vocabulary, you're a lot more convincing. And that's the first rule of communication, right? Know your audience. So when we need to know our audience when it comes to our customers, we also need to know our audience when it comes to this, this is our internal customer, if you will. So we can talk about operating model. So an operating model is how you deliver value to your users. So we can talk about how, like, content operations is the concept, but we have an operating model. So the operating model is like the production line and how it works. The value delivery chain. Well, there's something called the Porter value chain, and I put this graphic here. And if you Google it, you can find lots of information about it. And they talk about how you have to build on the value chain to deliver value all the way through the like the production line. And so they've put this into like inbound operations, outbound, and then marketing, sales, and service. And so you've got those like support activities and the primary activities. So you kind of go like, well, where does content fit in there? I think we're a hybrid, actually, because we have the inbound, we have the operations and outbound, and a lot of this stuff can't be sold without the instructions that go with it. But it's also support, because where is your service in there? Your service folks are on your primary activities and they need service content. But we also have other support content that is in the support layer. So we're kind of, we're in both areas. And then we have things like investment ROI. So investment ROI is, like an internal, if you think of ROI as return on investment, this is kind of like an internal rate of return. So we're spending money to save money as opposed to spending money to make money. So we are, improving the operating model by becoming more efficient. We're looking at, the value chain delivery, and we're going to get this internal ROI or investment ROI because of it. So I'm a big fan of Lean, and they have Lean for products. Obviously, it started with Toyota and the assembly line, but they also have Lean for services. And we've got these 8 kinds of waste. And if anyone is in your organization that's in Agile, they'll be very familiar with these. So I've given an example for each one. There are many more ways that transportation or inventory or motion or any of these can be interpreted, but this would be an example. So if we're transporting files from folder to folder, that's a transportation waste. If we're creating duplicated content or having to slog through outdated content, that's an inventory waste, and so on. So overproduction is that thing of I'm going to make 20 copies and now I have to update 20 copies. And defects, hard coding content into code. I heard someone say, well, we don't, this is 2022, we don't do that anymore. Guess what? It happens all the time. They're still doing it. And so we have to be able to eliminate that waste by having a source that can, API content into where it needs to go. And the skills utilization one is huge because there are too many people that are doing rote tasks where a computer could do it really quickly. And what we're seeing now with generative AI, where a lot of those rote tasks can be done by through an AI-enabled function, we're going to see some of that going away, but it's still worth calling out. So we need to use the language of business if we're going to talk about it and about content operations. And I've divided into kind of tactical and strategic descriptors. So tactical is when we're talking to our peers, the staff that report to us, or maybe our immediate managers, where we could talk about why we want to do content operations, why we want to look at our content operations, why we want to improve our operating models, is because we want to do things like reduce efficiencies. We want to make your job easier, not harder. We want to automate things. We want to have standard repeatable processes. We want to monitor what we're doing through analytics, and we want to take those insights and make more improvements. We want to be able to scale, and we want to ensure resource availability. Now, if I'm going to talk to the C-suite about it, I'm probably not going to describe it that way, because for them, that's where their eyes are going to glaze over, because that's too tactical for their purposes. So with them, I'm going to use other language. I'm going to talk about reputational risk and compliance risk. I'm going to talk about activating strategy to drive value. And we know that content strategy is a plan and driving value is delivering the goods. So, that's corporate speak for that. We want to improve the collaboration across value streams, scale and respond to demand. So we talked about that a bit earlier. Information enablement is an interesting one because there's an organization called EXO, and they talk about exponential growth of companies. So CEOs take a very, very expensive program with them to learn how to grow their organizations by 10 times. And one of the things that they say is you have to be able to enable information exchange. And when they ask, how do you do that? They say, go ask your writers. So part of it is also automating these continuous delivery pipelines. So think of Agile, where you work in sprints in lockstep with the developers, and reducing content debt. This is a huge one because we all know what technical debt is. When developers are rushing through something, so they take a code shortcut, but they know they have to go and clean it up at some point. And if they don't, then until they do clean it up, it's technical debt, because something could go wrong at some point. Content debt is never counted. They're always asking us to take shortcuts, and then we know we need to go and clean it up, and there's never any time to clean it up, except maybe there's a quarterly audit or a half-year audit where everybody gets together and tries to rationalize everything, and then it just doesn't really happen with it happens, but it kind of happens in a rushed way because human error, you get tired, you get error fatigue, and so on, all those things. So it's the debt that keeps on giving, and talking about it just brings that to the attention. The same thing about improving collaboration across the value stream. That means that you're saying to them, content is a value stream. You're not thinking about it as a value stream, but if we're going to improve collaboration across the value streams, you have to start thinking about content as a value stream. And it will also help you with improving innovation. So that's the way I would talk to senior management about content operations. So to wrap up, we have a book. So as soon as there's a book published, it kind of legitimizes the profession. And I remember when I went to South by Southwest, I think it was in 2010. And I said, I have an idea for a book on content strategy. And they went, oh, there's already a book on content strategy. And I thought, surely there's room for one more. And there was only one book at the time on content strategy. No, there were two. There was Anne Rockley's book and Christina Halvers's book. But now we have a book on content operations. And this is really exciting because it's the first book on content operations. And before you all run off to Google and say, yeah, but there are a bunch of other books, you'll notice that they're all focused on marketing. It's like how to use content operations to get better conversions to customers. We're not talking about that. We're talking about efficiencies here. So Carlos Evia, he's the Associate Dean and CTO and a professor at Virginia Tech. And he was looking at actually technical writing textbooks and went, these are so out of date and we need something that's got a bit more oomph to it and more reflective of current practices. So he wanted a book that was genre neutral. It can apply to marketing. It can apply to enabling content, content that helps us get our tasks done. And he wanted it to be technology neutral. So this is what happened. He just put this book together, got a bunch of people to contribute to the book, and we made it happen. So the audience is for practitioners, yes, but it's also for management and practitioners in what I would call adjacent professions. So like the UXers, the developers, product management, we've localization. So we've got chapters on all of those things because a lot of what they do, and if you've ever had to go put your content into Figma and then chase your content around all of these design files, you'll understand why it was important to talk to those folks as well. So there are 11 contributors, and in the middle, you'll see that like Carlos and I both wrote things at the beginning, but then we talked about operationalizing content creation, because I realized that we had things about governance and the business case and personalization and localization, but no one was talking to the writers. So the whole idea is that we're not teaching people how to write. They know how to write, but we're teaching people how to manage content with efficiency so that you can leverage it better. So the book is open source in that sense of that you can have a free download of it in either PDF or EPUB fashion. If you really do want to buy a paper copy, you can get it off of Amazon or right from the publisher at Virginia Tech. So that's really exciting. It's been out now for the better part of a year. And I've heard people say things like, I've devoured it cover to cover and am using it all the time. And that concludes my presentation. TWI, we have consulting services and content operations services, which consist of like production language and training and learning. And then, of course, we do content strategy and AI stuff, because who doesn't now, and user adoption. But I want to just tell you about one other thing, and that is that if you are thinking of going to Lavacon and have not signed up yet, you can use this referral code, Content Ops, and you can get a $250 discount on an in-person registration. So at this point, it's like if you walk in and say, I'm here, I want to sign up, keep this code and you can get that discount. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing and take any questions.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a
Some
bit of a whirlwind, yes.
incredible information there. I know we've got at least a couple of questions in the chat, and maybe as you answer those, others will arise. Tony, do you want to queue up the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rahel. Tons of great info there. And if anyone has questions they haven't put in the chat yet, this is a great time to do it. Our first one came from Cynthia, and I think you touched on this a little bit, Rahel, but curious what kind of evidence you've seen that people have shown successfully stakeholders to convince them it's worth investing in content ops.
So I actually wrote a post where I think I put like 9 different examples. The one that really has struck me, because people will say to me, oh, this only works with big companies, because we work with the SAPs and the Amazons of the world at TWI. But I go back to my own practice before, when I was an independent consultant. And there was a company of like 3 people. They were a startup. They were creating noise cancellation software that would go into headphones and hearing aids and so on. That was working on some natural language processing ability. It was very exciting at the time. And when they said, oh, we have to produce all of these documents, and particularly if we're going to put them into hearing aids, that's a medical device. But we're 3 people. Like, I've got 2 guys doing the coding and me. So we realized that it was mostly around API documentation and so on, because other people had to know how to integrate that code into their product. So I told them all about how to modularize content and where to put it. And they used DITA, and they used a couple of scripts, and they could, with a click of a button, generate over 200 documents. And he said, you just saved us like so much headache, because we couldn't have hired that army of writers that we needed to do that. So they just documented the code in the code and then sucked it out. And they knew which, because they were tagging it, they knew which content went into which document, and for which variation of their product, and they just automated it. I had another situation where I did something with a bank, and they had a process where everything, so at a bank, even if you have a comma on the website that needs to be changed, a lawyer has to sign it off. And so we had this thing where we were doing something, and it was in 4 languages. And so it was like 24 people had to look at this, and then you would translate it, and then they would have to look at it again, and then it could go wherever it needed to go on the various websites. And so we took a help authoring tool just as a straw man, and they were like, can't touch the tech stack. And I said, we're not touching your tech stack. What we're replacing is Microsoft Word. That's what we're replacing. And so we got it down to 5 minutes. Instead of 2 weeks and 24 people, it was like 2 people and 5 minutes. And they kind of went, the QA people were just so flustered. They went, okay, well, you have to prove repeatability. So you need to do it 5 times. So the secretary were like, 1, 2. They went, no, you have to do it once a day for 5 days. Okay. So every morning it was like 1. And they went, oh, wow. And so then they went from like, we didn't want to even put this on the board. For 4 months, we tried to get this on the board to do, right? And they wouldn't devote any time to it. And just after this happened, and I had to get not the CTO of the bank, but then the next guy down, he had to come up to the office and kind of read the developers the riot act, because they measured efficiency in how many sprints it takes to develop this. And he goes, you're going to have all these writers doing this for 2 years. That's going to cost a lot more. And so they finally put it on and then just by serendipity, the regulators came along and said, you need to change this 1 word in all the languages, of course. And they went, oh, it's going to be like 30 places. And we went, no, because this is this new process. You change it, you get these 2 people to sign it off, and then you hit the button, because it never touches human hands again. And they went, whoa, this is amazing. Why didn't you tell us earlier? And I'm thinking, oh my God. You know, for 4 months we had to like fight with you, and then and now it's now we're the heroes. So I've come across these over and over and over again, and that's why people bring me in. And so I don't have that kind of that challenge of convincing them that it needs doing, because they brought me in because they know it needs doing. My challenge is to actually get them to do the work, because you hear these things like, I've been writing code for 15 years and I've never heard of this stuff. And it's like, okay, you know, I've been doing this since you were in diapers, honey. So just like stand aside and let me get my work done. And you've got others where they it's like, that's going to cost a lot of money. And he was like, okay, so it's my job to convince them that like, you're going to spend this much, but you're going to save all this other money. And so, and you're going to save it every year, because if you hadn't done this, you're going to have to spend that every year. So that's, you know, where all the metrics come in. And I've had the, you know, I've had all sorts of nonsense excuses given to me for why they can't do this or why they can't do that, or why they don't want to do this or why they don't want to do that. And you just have to kind of chip away at it until they've painted themselves into a corner. But the conundrum is that sometimes there was one place where we got 95% improvement. And some of that was with process. Most of it was with process. And one little piece of it was through technology. And we wrote up a paper and we went and presented it at a conference. Now, the thing is, when you say, I can get up to 95% efficiency, they freak out and they go, no, you're inflating your numbers, because nobody can get that kind of efficiency. But if you say, well, we can get 20% efficiency, then they go, well, that's not good enough. We're not going to invest if it's only 20%. So you're kind of like damned if you do and damned if you don't. And that's probably the hardest part. I just saw a message come up saying change management is always the hardest part. Yes. And it's particularly hard when, you know, I'm past the age of saying things discreetly, but it's hard when everyone looks at me and they see their mother, and mom can barely use Google or set up the printer. So what do you know? You're just a middle-aged woman. Go back into the corner and knit some content. Here's some knitting needles. Go, you know. And so in a couple of times, I've actually taken a much younger guy with me, and he becomes my beard because they'll listen to him. It helps even more if he's tall and white, but you know, that's, we don't talk about those things. But it's those kinds of things that actually these are unconscious bias that you're fighting against. It has nothing to do with the actual facts. It doesn't have to do with the potential savings. It's just some on content beard. Yes, I'm going to grow one soon. It's the unconscious bias. And so some of it is the having to convince people that you know what you're talking about. Unfortunately.
Rahel, I'm actually gonna jump in and ask a question. I know we've got at least another question from our audience, but you know, you said now, you know, once a book has been written, then it sort of becomes a thing, right? And so, you know, as content operations is getting to be more, you know, more something people are talking about and reading about, are you seeing that it do you see a path for there being content operations manager or something to that effect, you know, as a job description? And if so, you know, what would you say are sort of the like key, or you know, the most important skills that someone who would be interested in going into, whether or not it's that description or whether they're trying to just facilitate, you know, make it happen internally in whatever their current role is, what skills do you think are the most important to have?
So I'm going to say, first of all, I don't think that there's going to be any particular title that it falls under. It could be under content strategist, like I'm a content strategist, just as you are, Paula. And, you know, we look at these things, right? Like, why do you do a content audit? Because you want it to be more efficient in production. Why do we adopt new technology and new processes to do it more efficiently? So it could be like head of TechCom. I have someone who's like in her job, she's I think her title is TechCom manager. And this is why they got in touch with us, is because they wanted, you know, to do things more efficiently. And sometimes the driver for efficiency isn't kind of, we want to do things better, or we want to alleviate some sort of internal team problem. It's, oh my gosh, we're creating 3 more product lines, and how are we going to cope with all this extra content? And how are we going to manage it all in a better way? So sometimes it's like an actual business driver that goes upstream and is like, you guys better figure out a way to do this better, because otherwise we're just going to drown. So there's a little bit of that. So what do I think are important? So I think you have to understand the principles of content management. You have to understand what can be done through automation and what can't be done through automation. So sometimes you get marketing people saying, well, I want it to, you know, figure out, it's basically, I want it to read my mind and do blah. And it's like, no, it can't read your mind. But if you have something that's in a consistent format and follows a schema and da 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 da, then you can automate it, right? So you have to understand those principles of automation, and you have to keep up with what's on the marketplace. Like when you go to a vendor, when you go to a conference, go see all the vendors and see what they can do. Like there's amazing things that can be done. And when I go to TACOM in Stuttgart, you know, they've got like 4,000 people attend this. So there's a whole floor of vendors, and they have the most varied range of functions, everything from authoring systems and, you know, CCMSs to product information management to content lifecycle management to content delivery systems to automated, I don't even know what to call them. They take data files and they create videos from them, like how-to videos. So each step becomes a thing and it matches it with images, and they can do 10,000 videos in a year for, you know, for an organization. Like those kinds of things are you need to know about them, because when you're asked to put together an ecosystem, and if you kind of go, well, you can take Microsoft Word and do this with it, you know, you've lost all your credibility. So you need to know what's out there, because every organization is going to need a different kind of content ecosystem, and you can't diagnose. So it's almost being like being a content doctor. You can't come to a good diagnosis unless you've studied all the symptoms and all the potential outcomes, right? So you have to know about this stuff, and you need to know about like the basics of change management, I think, because if you're trying to get people to adopt a new technology or a new process, or sometimes both, you've got to be able to bring them along on the journey. And so even if you're not the one doing it, you need to be able to work with the change management people within an organization. So I think those are the key things that you need to know.
Yeah, and that was my comment about change management, and I think, you know, as you're saying, even sometimes when that's a change for the good, it's still different, right? And it breaks people's mental models, or, you know, their usual way of doing things. And
I learned it the hard way, because many years ago I was doing something at a very, very large e-commerce retailer, and I was trying to teach people how to do a new process with a new technology, and I had a couple of people run out of the room crying. And then I realized like, okay, first I have to teach them the new theory behind it, like give them a new mental model using familiar tools. And then once you bring in the new technology, then they go, oh yeah, this is like what I was just doing, but easier. Because as long as it's making someone's job easier, they will adopt it. If it's making their job harder, they'll never adopt it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Two more questions, and thanks everybody for getting stuff in there. This one's coming from Andrea. Question: do you have any advice on how to handle constant rush requests from departments outside of a content department?
Well, I would say that, okay, there's a difference between rush requests that are non-standard and rush requests that are standard. Because if you can make them do something in a standard way. Many years ago, we had a rush request for something, and I remember the graphic artist saying, okay, if you ask for it at this stage, it costs you $22. And if you ask for it at this stage, it costs you $122, but you're asking for it now and it's going to cost you $12,000. So do you really need it that badly? And if you do, well, that's what we're going to charge back to your department. So then they realize like, okay, if I want to keep the cost down, I need to come in and, go through the regular process. Sometimes you can't help rush requests, but by asking them to do it through kind of regular channels, even if it's sped up through regular channels, it means that at least you're not going to go off the rails in terms of like, oh yeah, I was in such a rush, I didn't put the files in the right place, or I didn't get the sign off, and now I can't prove that they actually signed it off, those kinds of things. So that would be my only advice in that area.
Excellent. Thank you. And last question, and thank you so much for fielding all these, comes from Felice, wondering if you have another book in you in the future, what would you predict the book would be about?
Well, I've got two overdue books and one new book in me. So the one that's Naz and I have to update our book content strategy, connecting the dots between business, brand, and benefits. And we were going to do that this year, but both of us had a very disruptive year. And so that's going to be next year. Then there's, I wanted to do a book on content operations that's more kind of a, if you think of, I can't remember her name. She wrote like the content strategy toolkit. It was like very tactical and hands-on.
Megan
So I
Casey.
wanted to, thank you, Megan Casey. So I wanted to do something like that for content operations. And then I wanted to take I don't know if anyone's seen like that Uber blog post called The Uneven History of Content Strategy. I wanted to turn that into a proper book and do a little bit more research on that. So I just need to get kind of through this year, which has been really kind of crazy in terms of I moved from London to Ireland. I moved from a city of 8 million to a town of 5,000. I took a job in another country. I have to become a new tax resident, like all that stuff. So now once that settles down, I can kind of start carving out some time to work on the books.
Well, we'll all be anxiously awaiting any more words of wisdom from Rahel.
I saw something from Mark Tabasco. I don't know where oh yes. He said that content management takes a lot of regular communication, so the new thing becomes familiar. And this is one of the things I talk about, is that at the beginning, for any new thing, you're spending 95% of your mental capacity figuring out which keys to press rather than actually doing the work. And then eventually it ends up like, tilting the other way, where you start through muscle memory, just kind of clicking on what you should be clicking on and not really thinking too much about the mechanics of it. And so that's, I think, a really important thing to keep in mind when you're changing your operating model, because it will take people time to adjust. And awkward silence.
Thank you. Yeah, I think
I think we're
that's
all
it for questions, but yes.
catching up on the chat there and seeing if there was anything else, but
I thought
yeah, I think
I thought everybody was muted.
like to. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, looks like we've got some nice, people. Everyone is saying nice things about the presentation. Thank you all for joining us. We will get the recording up soon, and we'll post about that on all those channels I mentioned before, our website, LinkedIn, Slack, the Meetup site. So keep an eye on all of those. And reminder to, again, keep an eye on all those sites for upcoming events. Next month, as I mentioned, we'll have Kevin Nichols talking about enterprise content strategy. That will be another fantastic event. So we hope to see you there. And thank you so much, Rahel. I'm really thrilled that we managed to get you into the Pacific time zone. And
My pleasure.
after
And
all
I
these years. Yeah.
So happy.
can't
All
wait to
right.
see you in Portland.
I know. Well, I'll be there too. So if anyone else is going to LavaCon, please come by and say hi. And of course,
It's at the end of this month, yeah?
End of this month.
Okay. I have to see if I can make it down.
And don't forget that
$250 off. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
All right.
What was the code?
Content ops, I believe. right?
Content ops.
Content
And
ops?
it will give you kind of the 250 off the walk-in registration.
Oh, right on. Thank you,
Right.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right. Have a good one,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.